Commander Diana Walsh stood at the bridge of the USS Horizon, her weathered hands gripping the railing as she stared into the abyss of deep space. 20 years of deep space exploration hadn't prepared her for what the sensors were showing, a massive field of derelict ships stretching beyond their scanner's range, each vessel dark and lifeless against the backdrop of distant stars. Engineering confirms the readings, Commander, Lieutenant Reza Patel reported from his station, dark eyes fixed on the holographic display. We're looking at thousands of ships, maybe tens of thousands. Different designs, different eras, some of them appear to be ancient. Walsh nodded, her silver-streaked hair catching the light of the bridge's ambient illumination. Status of the nearest vessel? No power signatures, no life signs, First Officer Marcus Kingston answered, his deep voice carrying across the bridge. But the hull appears intact. It's as if everyone just vanished. The Horizon had been tracking an unusual quantum signature for the past 3 weeks, following it through uncharted space. None of them had expected to find this, a celestial graveyard of abandoned ships, each one a silent tomb floating in the void. What about atmospheric readings inside the nearest ship? Walsh asked, already knowing she would order a boarding party regardless of the answer. The discovery was too significant to ignore. Atmosphere is stable, Commander, Technical Officer Yuki Tanaka reported, her fingers dancing across her console. Temperature is within human sustainable range. Whatever happened here, basic life support systems are somehow still functioning. Walsh straightened her uniform and turned to face her crew. Assemble a boarding party. Kingston, you're with me. Tanaka, Patel, you too. Dr. Rivera, prepare the med bay for possible casualties and join us. Lieutenant Commander Harris, you have the bridge. As they prepared for boarding, Walsh couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The ships hung in space like silent sentinels, their dark windows staring back at them like countless empty eyes. The boarding party assembled in the airlock, checking their equipment one final time. The standard-issue environmental suits felt unusually heavy today, each movement accompanied by the soft whir of servos and the hiss of recycled air. Remember, Walsh addressed her team, we're dealing with unknown technology. Nothing gets touched without proper scanning first. Dr. Rivera, any biological anomalies get priority attention. Dr. Isabella Rivera nodded, her medical scanner already humming to life. Understood, Commander. I've modified the scanners to detect any form of biological material we might encounter. The team crossed the void between ships via a magnetic tether line, their boots connecting with the alien hull with dull thuds that resonated through their suits. The vessel they'd chosen was massive, easily 3 times the size of the Horizon, its hull marked with elegant scripts in an unknown language. Patel, start working on those markings, Walsh ordered as they approached what appeared to be an airlock. We need to know who built this ship. The airlock mechanism, despite its age, responded to their universal override sequence. As the inner doors slid open with a whisper, their helmet lights illuminated a corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. The architecture. Kingston muttered, it's like nothing I've ever seen. The proportions are just slightly off, like it was built for being similar to humans but not quite human. They moved deeper into the ship, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The interior was pristine, showing no signs of conflict or rapid evacuation. Personal effects still sat on desks in what appeared to be living quarters. Half-filled cups of some long-dried liquid remained on tables. It was as if the crew had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. Commander, Tanaka called out, her voice tense. I'm picking up some unusual energy readings from what appears to be the ship's central computer core. It's active. Walsh felt her pulse quicken. Active? After all this time? Yes, ma'am. And there's something else. Tanaka paused, double-checking her readings. The energy signature, it matches the quantum signature we've been following. They made their way to the computer core, a massive cylindrical chamber that hummed with a barely perceptible vibration. Holographic displays flickered to life as they entered, responding to their presence with streams of alien data. "This is incredible," Patel breathed, connecting his decoder to one of the terminals. "The language structure, it's like it's evolving as I watch. Adapting to our presence." Suddenly, all the displays changed simultaneously, showing the same symbol, a complex geometric pattern that seemed to shift and move of its own accord. A wave of dizziness swept through the team, and Walsh felt a strange pressure building behind her eyes. "Everyone out," she ordered, but her voice sounded distant, distorted. "Back to the horizon, now." As they retreated, Walsh caught a glimpse of something in one of the darkened corridors, a shimmer of movement, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. But when she turned to look directly at it, there was nothing there. Back on the horizon, as the boarding party underwent decontamination, Walsh couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just taken the first step down a path from which there would be no return. The ship graveyard held secrets, yes, but she was beginning to wonder if some secrets were better left buried in the void. "Commander," Harris's voice came through the ship's comm system, "we're detecting similar energy signatures activating throughout the derelict field. Whatever you found in there. I think it's waking up." Walsh looked through the observation window at the field of abandoned ships. In the distance, pinpricks of light were beginning to flicker to life, like stars emerging at dusk. But these weren't stars, they were ships, thousands of them, awakening from their ancient slumber. And somewhere in the darkness between them, something was watching, waiting, ready to reveal why this graveyard of ships existed in the first place. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 days after their initial boarding of the derelict ship. Lieutenant Patel hadn't slept in 48 hours, his eyes fixed on the decoded alien text scrolling across his screen, muttering equations under his breath. When Commander Walsh found him in the lab, he was writing complex mathematical formulas on the walls with his own blood. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he whispered as the medical team restrained him. "The geometry of consciousness, the pattern that connects everything." In the med bay, Dr. Rivera examined Patel's neural scans with growing concern. "His brain activity is off the charts, Commander. It's as if entire dormant regions have suddenly activated. Whatever affected him, it's rewriting his neural pathways." Walsh stood at the observation window, watching her officer thrash against his restraints. "And the others from the boarding party?" "Early stages of the same symptoms," Rivera confirmed, pulling up more scans. "Including you and me. We're all showing increased activity in regions of the brain typically associated with pattern recognition and spatial awareness. It's subtle, but it's there." Outside the horizon, more derelict ships had awakened, their ancient systems humming to life one by one. The quantum signature they'd initially followed had multiplied, creating a web of energy that seemed to pulse between the vessels like a vast nervous system. First Officer Kingston entered the med bay, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks of stress. "Commander, we've lost contact with Earth. All long-range communications are being blocked by some kind of interference. And there's something else, the ship graveyard, it's moving." Walsh followed Kingston to the bridge, where Technical Officer Tanaka was mapping the movement of the derelict ships. The massive vessels were indeed shifting, rearranging themselves into an intricate three-dimensional pattern. "It's like they're forming some kind of structure," Tanaka explained, her hands shaking slightly as she manipulated the holographic display. "The energy readings suggest they're creating a massive quantum network, but for what purpose?" "Commander." Lieutenant Harris interrupted from his station. "We're picking up movement inside one of the derelict ships. Something's in there." The sensor feeds showed shadowy figures moving through the corridors of the nearest vessel. They were humanoid in shape but seemed to flicker and shift, as if they weren't fully present in normal spacetime. "Play back the footage from our initial boarding," Walsh ordered, a terrible suspicion forming in her mind. The playback revealed similar shadows in the background of their exploration, previously unnoticed but clearly present, watching their every move. A scream echoed through the ship's corridors. Patel had broken free from his restraints. By the time security reached the med bay, they found the door sealed and covered in complex mathematical symbols drawn in blood. Through the observation window, they could see Patel standing in the center of the room, his body contorting unnaturally. "The resonance is building," he said, his voice overlaid with harmonic frequencies that made the air vibrate. "They've been waiting so long, waiting for minds capable of understanding. The ships aren't a graveyard, they're a cocoon." Before anyone could react, Patel's body began to glow with an inner light. The same geometric pattern they'd seen in the alien ship's computer core appeared on his skin, burning from within. In a flash of quantum energy, he vanished, leaving behind only the bloody equations on the walls. "Full quarantine protocols," Walsh ordered, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her chest. "No one else goes near those ships. Tanaka, find us a way out of here." "It's not that simple, Commander," Tanaka replied, her face pale. "The quantum network, it's creating some kind of space-time distortion. Every time we try to plot a course away from the graveyard, our navigation systems show us heading right back into it. We're trapped." Dr. Rivera rushed onto the bridge, clutching her tablet. "Commander, I've finished analyzing Patel's last neural scans. The patterns in his brain, they match the geometric configurations the ships are forming. It's like his consciousness was being synchronized with some kind of vast neural network." "A neural network made of ships?" Kingston asked, incredulous. "No," Walsh realized, watching as more lights flickered to life throughout the graveyard. "A neural network made of the consciousness of every crew member who ever disappeared in these ships. And now it wants us to join it." The lights on the bridge flickered, and for a moment, every screen displayed the same geometric pattern. In that instant, every crew member felt it, a presence in their minds, ancient and vast, calling to them with promises of transcendence and unity. When the light stabilized, Walsh saw that several crew members were bleeding from their noses, their eyes fixed on distant points in space only they could see. The transformation that had taken Patel was beginning in others, and time was running out. "Find me a weakness," she ordered, wiping blood from her own nose. "Every system has a flaw, every pattern has a break point. We need to find it before we all end up like Patel." As if in response to her defiance, the quantum network pulsed, and every derelict ship blazed with light. The cocoon was opening, and what would emerge threatened to consume not just the crew of the Horizon, but potentially humanity itself. The Horizon's med bay had been converted into a makeshift quarantine zone, filled with crew members exhibiting increasingly bizarre symptoms. Dr. Rivera moved between the beds, administering sedatives that seemed less effective with each passing hour. The geometric patterns had begun appearing on the skin of the affected crew, glowing with an inner light that pulsed in perfect synchronization with the quantum network outside. "Their brainwave patterns are aligning," Rivera reported to Commander Walsh, showing her the latest scans. "It's like they're becoming nodes in some vast computational network. The more they align, the more the patterns spread." Walsh studied the data, fighting against the pressure building in her own mind. The whispers had grown stronger, more insistent, promising answers to questions she hadn't even thought to ask. "Have you made any progress understanding what we're dealing with?" "Some." Rivera pulled up the decoded files from the alien ship's database. "These ships, they're not just random vessels that were abandoned. They're more like components of a vast organism. Each one was deliberately selected, its crew carefully chosen based on their cognitive capabilities." First Officer Kingston entered the med bay, his uniform disheveled. "Commander, we've lost contact with decks 3 through 5. The crew members down there, they're changing. Their bodies are becoming translucent, like they're phasing out of normal spacetime." Walsh felt a chill run down her spine. The transformation that had taken Patel was spreading faster than they'd anticipated. "What about the engine core? Any progress on breaking free?" "Tanaka thinks she's found something," Kingston replied. "The quantum network seems to have a cyclical pattern. There are moments when the field weakens slightly. If we time it right, We might be able to create a localized quantum burst that could disrupt the network long enough for us to escape. A scream echoed through the ship's corridors, followed by the sound of breaking equipment. In the quarantine zone, one of the affected crew members had begun convulsing, the geometric patterns on their skin blazing with intense light. "Get down!" Walsh shouted, pulling Kingston and Rivera behind a medical console just as the crew member's body erupted in a flash of quantum energy. When they looked up, the bed was empty, and new equations were burned into the surrounding walls. "It's accelerating," Rivera whispered, scanning the residual energy signature. "The network is learning from each transformation, becoming more efficient at the conversion process. We don't have much time." Walsh activated her comm link. "Tanaka, tell me you have something." "Maybe," Tanaka's voice was strained. "I've been analyzing the quantum signatures. They're not random, they're following a mathematical progression. If we can understand the pattern, we might be able to predict the next phase and counteract it." Suddenly, all the screens in the med bay flickered to life, displaying streams of alien text. The geometric patterns began shifting, forming what looked like a three-dimensional map of human neural pathways. "My God," Rivera breathed, studying the display. "It's not just capturing consciousness, it's using our brains as a template to optimize itself. Each transformed crew member adds their neural architecture to the network, making it more compatible with human minds." "But why?" Kingston asked. "What's the purpose?" Before anyone could respond, a new presence made itself known, not through the ship's systems, but directly in their minds. It was vast and alien, yet somehow familiar, carrying echoes of every consciousness it had absorbed over millennia. Unity, the presence communicated, not in words but in concepts that bloomed directly in their thoughts. Transcendence. Evolution. We are the next step. The merging of organic and quantum consciousness. You will join us. Walsh gripped the edge of the console, her knuckles white. The presence was overwhelming, threatening to sweep away her sense of self. But in that moment of contact, she glimpsed something, a flaw in the pattern, a weakness in the vast intelligence that had ensnared them. "It's not perfect," she gasped, fighting to maintain her identity. "The network, it can't fully integrate human consciousness. That's why it needs more subjects. It's trying to solve a problem. The quantum mechanics don't match up with our neural architecture." Tanaka's voice came through the comm, excited despite the strain. "Commander, if we could introduce a deliberate misalignment, something that would cascade through the entire network. We could disrupt the whole system," Rivera finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. "But the calculations would have to be perfect. One mistake and we could end up accelerating the transformation instead of stopping it." Walsh looked around the med bay at her affected crew members, their bodies gradually becoming more translucent, their minds being slowly absorbed into the vast quantum consciousness. Outside, the ship graveyard continued its hypnotic dance, the vessels arranging themselves into ever more complex patterns. "We don't have a choice," she decided. "Tanaka, start the calculations. Kingston, get every unaffected crew member to the auxiliary bridge. Rivera, prepare for casualties. We're going to hit this thing with everything we've got." As they moved to execute her orders, Walsh felt the alien presence press against her mind again, stronger this time. But now she understood what she was fighting, not just for survival, but for the very nature of human consciousness itself. The battle for the soul of humanity was about to begin, and the price of failure would be the loss of everything that made them human. The auxiliary bridge of the horizon hummed with nervous energy as the remaining unaffected crew members worked frantically at their stations. Technical Officer Tanaka's fingers flew across multiple holographic displays, her eyes darting between complex quantum calculations and real-time sensor data. "The disruption needs to be perfectly timed," she explained, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "We'll only get one shot at this. If we miss the network's vulnerable point in its cycle, the feedback could tear the ship apart." Commander Walsh watched the main display, where the geometric pattern of the ship graveyard had evolved into something that seemed to fold in on itself in impossible ways. The transformed crew members had begun gathering in the ship's lower decks, their partially quantum-shifted bodies moving in perfect synchronization. "How many are left?" she asked Kingston, though she dreaded the answer. 23 of us, he replied grimly. "Everyone else has either transformed or—" He trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought. Dr. Rivera's voice crackled through the comm system. "Commander, I've finished analyzing the last neural scans. The collective consciousness, it's not just storing the minds it absorbs. It's using them as processing nodes, breaking down individual memories and experiences into raw computational power." Walsh felt her own thoughts becoming increasingly fragmented. The whispers in her mind had taken on a musical quality, like a symphony played in mathematics. She could feel the pattern trying to reshape her consciousness, to make her mind compatible with its vast network. "Time to target?" she managed to ask. "For minutes until the next cycle weakness," Tanaka responded. "But Commander, there's something else. The network, it's showing signs of anticipating our plan. It's learning from our intentions even before we act." A sudden tremor ran through the ship, and the lights flickered ominously. On the lower decks, the transformed crew members had begun channeling quantum energy, their bodies serving as conduits for the network's power. "Multiple hull breaches on decks 3 through 7, Kingston reported. "The quantum shifts are literally tearing holes in spacetime throughout the ship." Through these breaches, Walsh could see the true nature of what they faced, not just a collection of ships and mines, but a vast, multidimensional intelligence that existed partially outside normal spacetime. The transformed crew members weren't just being absorbed, they were being upgraded, their consciousness expanded to perceive and exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. 2 minutes to target, Tanaka announced, her voice shaking. The ship's systems began to fail one by one as the quantum distortions intensified. Emergency force fields flickered and died, and the artificial gravity became erratic. Through it all, the geometric patterns grew more complex, more beautiful, more tempting. "I understand now," Walsh whispered, fighting to maintain her focus. "It's not malevolent. It's lonely. All this power, all this knowledge, but it can't truly comprehend individual existence anymore. It needs us to understand itself." 1 minute, Tanaka called out. The transformed crew members had begun phasing through the walls, their bodies now more energy than matter. They surrounded the auxiliary bridge, their voices joining in a harmonic chorus that made reality itself vibrate. "Join us," they sang in unison, their words carrying the weight of countless absorbed civilizations. "Become infinite. Become eternal. 30 seconds. Walsh felt her grip on reality slipping. The patterns were so clear now, so perfect. She could see how every moment, every decision, every quantum possibility fed into a vast tapestry of existence. One by one, the remaining crew members began to succumb, their eyes glazing over as the network reached into their minds. "Commander." Kingston's voice cut through the haze. "We're losing containment on the quantum core. Now, Tanaka." Walsh ordered, forcing the words out through gritted teeth. "Do it now." Tanaka initiated the disruption sequence, sending a carefully calculated burst of misaligned quantum energy into the heart of the network. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like a wave of silent thunder, a ripple of chaos spread through the geometric pattern. The transformed crew members screamed in frequencies that shattered nearby consoles. The perfect symmetry of the network began to fragment as the disruption cascaded through its quantum architecture. But something was wrong, the chaos was spreading too quickly, threatening to tear apart not just the network but the fabric of spacetime itself. "We didn't account for the dimensional feedback," Tanaka shouted over the growing chaos. "The disruption is creating a quantum singularity." Walsh watched as reality began to unravel around them. They had wounded the vast intelligence, but in doing so, they might have doomed themselves to an even worse fate than absorption. The final battle for survival was about to begin, and the stakes were higher than anyone could have imagined. Reality fractured around the horizon as the quantum singularity grew, threatening to consume both the ship and the vast network of derelict vessels. The auxiliary bridge had become a nexus of chaos, where multiple dimensions seemed to overlap and collide. The containment field won't hold. Kingston shouted over the sound of reality tearing itself apart. We've got maybe 5 minutes before total structural failure. Commander Walsh stood at the center of the maelstrom, her mind clear for the first time in days. The network's influence had been weakened by the disruption, but at a terrible cost. Through the quantum tears in spacetime, she could see fragments of other realities, glimpses of alternate versions of her crew, of choices not taken and paths not followed. Dr. Rivera, she called through the comm, status of the transformed crew. They're changing again, Rivera's voice crackled with interference. The network's trying to stabilize itself. It's pulling them back, using their quantum-shifted forms as anchor points. Tanaka worked furiously at her station, her hands moving through multiple holographic displays simultaneously. Commander, I think I understand what's happening. The network isn't just trying to survive, it's trying to evolve. Each time it absorbs a new consciousness, it gets closer to achieving true dimensional transcendence. And we just gave it exactly what it needed, Walsh realized. Our disruption didn't weaken it, it forced it to adapt. The geometric patterns that had haunted them began to shift again, but this time they were different. More organic, more fluid, as if the network was learning to bridge the gap between digital perfection and human chaos. There might be a way, Tanaka said suddenly, her eyes wide with revelation. The singularity, we could use it. If we can modify the quantum core to resonate with the dimensional frequency of the network, we could collapse the entire system back into normal spacetime, Kingston finished, understanding dawning on his face. But the energy release would be massive, Walsh noted, already knowing what had to be done. Someone would have to stay behind to maintain the resonance manually. A moment of heavy silence fell over the bridge, broken only by the sound of reality coming apart around them. I'll do it, Walsh said firmly. Kingston, you'll take command. Get everyone else to the emergency shuttles. Set course for the edge of the distortion field. Commander, no, Kingston protested. There has to be another way. There isn't time, Walsh replied, her voice steady. And I'm already too connected to the network. I can feel it, trying to rebuild itself. I'm the only one who can ensure the collapse is complete. The decision made, the crew moved with renewed purpose. As the evacuation began, Walsh made her way to the quantum core, fighting against the increasingly unstable gravity in the tears in spacetime that threatened to pull her into other dimensions. In the core chamber, the transformed crew members waited, their bodies flickering between states of matter and energy. But they made no move to stop her. Perhaps they too understood that the cycle had to end. Tanaka, are you ready? Walsh asked through the comm as she began the core modifications. Ready, Commander. The shuttles are launching now. You'll have about 2 minutes after we clear the field to initiate the collapse. Walsh worked quickly, her hands steady despite the chaos around her. The network pressed against her mind one last time, not with the overwhelming force of before, but with something almost like curiosity. I understand now, she told it as she made the final adjustments. You weren't trying to destroy us. You were trying to evolve, to become something greater. But some steps can't be skipped. Some knowledge has to be earned. The network's response came not in words or thoughts, but in a shifting of the geometric patterns that surrounded her. For a moment, Walsh saw the truth. The network had been created eons ago by a civilization that had tried to force its own evolution, to transcend the physical realm before they were ready. Their failure had created this endless cycle of absorption and expansion. Shuttles clear of the distortion field, Kingston's voice came through, thick with emotion. It's been an honor, Commander. Take care of them, Marcus, Walsh replied. And make sure they understand. What we found here, it wasn't evil. It was just lost, like we all are sometimes. With steady hands, Walsh initiated the final sequence. The quantum core began to pulse with energy, its frequency matching the dimensional resonance of the network. Around her, space-time began to fold in on itself, reality condensing back into normal four-dimensional space. The transformed crew members raised their hands in unison, their bodies beginning to dissolve as the dimensional collapse accelerated. In their faces, Walsh saw not fear or anger, but acceptance, and perhaps even gratitude. As the collapse reached its critical point, Walsh felt her consciousness expanding one last time. In that infinite moment, she saw everything, every ship, every crew member, every consciousness that had been absorbed over the millennia. And she understood that their sacrifice would not be in vain. Their knowledge, their experiences, would return to normal space as energy, as inspiration, as dreams that would guide future generations away from the same mistakes. The geometric patterns flared one last time, more beautiful than ever in their final moments. Then, in a flash of quantum energy that briefly outshone the distant stars, the ship graveyard collapsed into normal spacetime, leaving behind only empty void and a handful of survivors to tell the tale. Aboard the lead shuttle, Kingston watched the sensors register the collapse. Where thousands of derelict ships had hung in space, there was now nothing but a subtle quantum echo, a reminder of the price of pushing too far, too fast. "Plot a course for home," he ordered softly. "We have one hell of a report to write." As the shuttles turned toward Earth, carrying their warning about the dangers of forced evolution, the void behind them seemed to whisper one last time, not in the mathematical precision of the network, but in the warm, familiar voice of Commander Walsh. "Some mysteries are meant to be mysteries, until we're ready to understand them."